With us now, Maggie Haberman, CNN political analyst and senior political correspondent for the New York Times, on two huge bylines this morning. Maggie, so nice to have you here with us. First, I do want to ask about your reporting that as part of this grand jury investigation, that these witnesses have been asked specifically about Donald Trump and his actions. This is something that's new. Look, we didn't even know that they were calling witnesses from within the White House a few days ago. Now we know they're having witnesses, and they've been asking about Trump, the significance.
Look, John, it certainly gets it closer to former President Trump. It doesn't, I want to be clear on this. We don't know that there's a specific investigation into Donald Trump, but all of these investigations relate to things that either he, helped put in motion or encouraged. And so these are witnesses who are being asked about conversations with him. It does suggest that the DOJ is moving closer to the former president. It does suggest that they are taking very seriously examining all aspects of this. I think the phone records piece too, John, is very significant. I think this looks at who was talking to whom, exactly what was taking place around that time. I think all of this, it just suggests, again, that there is steady movement toward former President Trump. What that looks like, as you say, it would be unprecedented if there was an actual indictment, but there is definitely an investigation underway.
Yeah, because if you're going to walk backwards from an indictment, obviously DOJ would have to be looking at President Trump's conduct around or on January 6th. But at the same time, it's been a long time coming that they would have gotten to this point, Maggie.
Look, they've been very methodical about what they've been doing, Brianna. I think that we have seen that. It certainly is 18 months, and I think since the riot at the Capitol on January 6th, and I don't think a ton of information has changed about that. But I think that, as you saw Garland say, this investigation is unprecedented in scope. They're looking not just at what was taking place in the White House, but how those various pieces overlap with the rioters, if they do, how the pieces overlap with this, so-called fake elector scheme. And so I think that they are looking at how these various pieces of the puzzle fit together and how those pieces relate to Donald Trump specifically.
Yeah, and we've used careful language, Maggie. We're not saying they're investigating the president, or we know that. You're not saying that. But
Nope.
There is reporting now that they are asking about things that he was involved in. And that's different, very different than we knew, at least even a few days ago. Maggie, your other reporting here, I want you to describe it, then I can read some of the emails that you revealed to the American people for the very first time. These are emails between Trump advisors and other people out there in the States having to do with what they called the fake elector scheme.
Right. So, John, this is a tranche of emails that Luke Broadwater and I reviewed, and there were, dozens of pages in which you had these lawyers who were working with a wing of the Trump campaign. There appear to be people who didn't know anything about it, both within the White House and on the campaign, but working within this wing to try to figure out a way to send these slates of quote unquote fake electors, to Congress on January 6th. Why do we use the word fake? Because one of the lawyers in this email tranche working out of Arizona used the word fake in quotes to describe these electors, saying they would be fake because they would not be legal under the law, which says they had to be approved of or signed into, recognized by the governor. Now, the lawyer did go on to say that he thought that legally this was acceptable to continue with this plan, but the fact that he wrote all of this is going to raise all kinds of questions about exactly what people thought they were doing. And the other point I'd raise, John, is that folks who are involved in this scheme have suggested they were doing this as a contingency plan, that this was just, if court challenges came through, then they had this slate of electors. These emails reveal that these lawyers were talking about keeping this under wraps as long as possible and out of the media's view. That doesn't sound like it relates to a court challenge.
No, and also there were people very committed to the election lie who were queasy about this, right? Maggie, you report this. Doug Mastriano, who was a state senator then, now running for governor in Pennsylvania, hugely committed to the election lie, and he was concerned.
Right. There's an email where Christina Bobb, who at the time was working for OAN News, now works with one of Donald Trump's political entities, sent an email to others saying that Mastriano, who's now the GOP candidate for governor in Pennsylvania, who was one of the points of contact they were looking for these slates of electors, that he needed reassurance, that he needed a phone call from Rudy Giuliani. He needed to be reassured that this was, quote, A, legal and B, essential to strategy. That's also very telling, as you say, about people's concerns about what they were getting involved in.
Maggie Haberman, great to see you. Thank you for sharing your reporting with us.
Thank you.